We've talked about beef. We got into chicken. We got into pork. The other big category of meat that people in the West are consuming is fish. And we quickly touched on this. But for people that are going to include that as part of their diet, let's talk about how you feel about that in a general sense and then quality.
Historically, I think fish has been a part of the human diet for thousands and thousands of years. More recently, fish is very, very polluted. Even wild fish is very, very polluted. I don't know that anyone is arguing for farm-raised fish. There are some operations that are doing sort of wild farming now, like Seatopia. No affiliation with them, but I've heard it's better. I haven't seen the actual data. But I think that farming of fish is generally horrible. Polychlorinated biphenyls, much higher. They're fed fish food, which is full of all sorts of pesticides and forever chemicals. So a farmed fish is a horrible thing to eat. Freshwater fish is pretty toxic these days. I don't think you want to fish in a lake and eat that fish anymore just because of the amount of industry and agriculture and environmental toxins that accumulate in lakes. And I mean, I used to fish when I was a kid. It was a really fun thing to do with my dad. We never ate the fish that I'm aware of, but freshwater fish, pretty freaking polluted. And there are studies suggesting that even one serving of freshwater fish now exceeds the limit of a lot of chemicals that both pregnant and non-pregnant women and men are supposed to get in a day or even a week. Atlantic salmon is entirely farmed. I would never eat Atlantic salmon. If you look at the label on Atlantic salmon, it has a coloring added. So just understand that Atlantic salmon is farmed fish and it would look just like your sea bass or your trout. It would look very, very white if it weren't coloring weren't added to the feed. Wild salmon is lower metals, but that's relatively speaking, and wild salmon is still pretty high in mercury and other metals. So even wild fish, I think, needs to be looked at carefully today. And a lot of people, I think, eat fish because red meat has been so vilified. And we're told fish is a great source of omega-3 fatty acids, which it is, but I think you can get plenty of EPA and DHA and ALA from animal fat, which we're told to fear, but is clearly healthy for humans, from dairy fat, butter, and egg yolks. I don't think humans need to eat fish to get enough omega-3s in any way, shape, or form. I'll comment on omega-3 in a moment a little further with regard to seed oils, but I just think that the levels of metals in fish beyond salmon are pretty substantial. Tuna is massively contaminated with lead. Well, mercury would be the biggest one, but lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic. Even the shellfish is pretty contaminated. So crustaceans, lobster, shrimp, scallops, which are delicious, mussels, oysters, pretty high levels of cadmium as bottom feeders. So making a lot of your diet into seafood of any form is a recipe for heavy metal toxicity. And people have talked about this. I mean, Tony Robbins got Hatterism, which is mercury toxicity related to Alice in Wonderland, Mad Hatter, right? The Mad Hatter had Hatterism, which is a colloquial term for mercury toxicity. Hat makers used to soak the fabric in mercury or something historically, and they would wear it on their heads and they would get sort of psychosis related to heavy metal toxicity. So Tony Robbins got profound heavy metal toxicity from his pescatarian diet. A lot of people have. It's just a recipe for disaster today. And this isn't to say that meat or chicken are free of heavy metals, but they're much lower. And certainly if your meat is grass-fed and grass-finished, the levels of heavy metals are going to be massively lower than a freshwater fish or even a wild fish, and certainly lower than a farm-raised fish. So I think heavy metals come up more and more for me because a lot of food has them. We talked about oats. We talked about lettuce. I mentioned that chocolate is quite high in heavy metals. I recently did a piece of content about heavy metals in cinnamon. There's heavy metals in salt. I think we just need to know across all of our foods what the levels of lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic are. There's certain heavy metals that even occur in seed oils leaching out from the plastic containers like antimony. But I think fish is dangerous today. It's just a scary thing to be eating. And I think most people are eating fish because they're afraid of red meat, and they need to know that red meat is back on the menu, and red meat is totally healthy for you and not bad for you in any way, shape, or form. Again, there's quality spectrum there. Eat grass-fed, grass-finished, preferably regeneratively raised, and look at the quality controls of the producer that you're getting it from. But I continue to strongly believe, and I'll say this again, that red meat is one of the healthiest foods on the planet for us today. It's healthier than chicken. It's healthier than pork. It's healthier than fish in so many ways. and it's eating grass. If it's eating grass for its whole life, it's a ruminant. It's just a very, very healthy food. And I hope that people wake up to that in terms of animal foods, red meat is, I would say, the healthiest animal food you can possibly eat. So eat more red meat. Don't fear it. It's not going to be a problem for you. And fish is just problematic. I think a pescatarian diet is a horrible idea today.
What you said about red meat there, I totally agree. Couldn't have said it better. It's a superfood. And again, coming back to what I said earlier, basing a lot of your diet around that, at least early on while you're learning, and the simplicity, if you can get grass-fed, grass-finished, even better. But either way, with that meat as your staple, you're going to be doing a lot of good.
And don't forget the organs, right? So meat is just the muscle meat. You know, we probably talked about that on our last podcast, but a little bit of liver every day goes a long way, or just a few ounces a week or half an ounce a day. I mean, that's usually what I do. You know, sometimes when I'm traveling, I'll do the hardened soil desiccated organs. When I have access to fresh liver, half an ounce a day, half an ounce, it's the size of a quarter, or, you know, like a small amount of liver a few times a week goes a long way in terms of our nutrition. I mean, liver is a multivitamin. If you want to go further, you can eat a little bit of heart. Heart is delicious. And I mean, I mentioned earlier, I do desiccated testicle, liver, heart, testicle, brain. The organs are valuable for humans. I mean, there's unique benefits to organs that have not really been talked about enough, but there's a good amount of historical research, mostly from Germany, and the team at Heart and Soil really did a great job finding all this research. But there's been studies in embryos and, injecting organ extracts into animals and humans that the organs really do seem to support the corresponding organ. And whether it has to do with bioavailable peptides that are stable in the organs when you freeze dry them, or that remain in the extract, or microRNAs at the level of the organ. I mean, you would have to eat like hundreds of pounds of testicle to get a bioactive dose of testosterone. But there are now so many anecdotes of men improving their sexual function, their libido, their hormones by eating testicle or desiccated testicle that something is probably going on there. And though testicle does contain testosterone, we've tested this at Heart and Soil, it's probably not the testosterone. It's either peptides or microRNAs. I mean, women really benefit from eating uterus, ovaries, and fallopian tubes in a supplement or something, because those are not really a delicacy. But the impact of organs on the corresponding organ is so profound. Liver is always regenerating, so liver seems to be uniquely beneficial for humans to eat. But there have been studies, randomized studies in humans looking at bovine cortex-derived phosphatidylserine improving cognitive outcomes in people with early onset dementia. And then they do phosphatidylserine derived from plants, and it doesn't have the same impact. So it's probably not the phosphatidylserine. It's probably something else in the bovine cortex being a part of the brain. So cow brain derived phosphatidylserine improves cognitive function in humans, but plant derived phosphatidylserine doesn't. So there's something going on with organs that we really don't fully understand. Just eat a little bit of organs every once in a while, and humans do way better. And if you have problems with a specific organ, consider experimenting with eating the corresponding organ. That's historically consistent. And like I said, there's actual interesting science that has been done that we never hear about because it's kind of mothballed and in a library in Germany that we actually went and found, and other articles. I mean, there was an 1889 article in the Lancet, so that's not in Germany. A guy named Brown-Séquard. So there's a syndrome, when you learn neurology in medical school or residency, there's a syndrome of spinal cord injury called Brown-Séquard syndrome. And this guy, Brown-Séquard, taught at prestigious universities in Paris, Harvard, in the late 1800s, and he published an article in the Lancet about injecting testicle extract into his own body when he was 72 years old and finding invigorating effects. So it's not that the research hasn't been done, it's just historical. It's old research. It hasn't been repeated, but there is a precedent for this, even in Western medical science. So eat some organs with your meat. You'll do a lot better. However you want to get them is fine. Fresh is probably best. Again, all raw food has a risk of contamination if you choose to eat raw liver. I do it all the time. I'm still alive. You make your own decisions. But yeah, red meat and organs, that's pretty good.
Paul, you mentioned that you want to close or at least come back to omega-3s and the seed oils. So we'll close on this. This is what I wanted to come to as well before we finished up.
So omega-6 versus omega-3, they seem to have different effects in the human body. And the amount of omega-3 in our diet is fairly small compared to the amount of omega-3 that we're getting, the amount of omega-3 in our diet is fairly small compared to the amount of omega-6 we're getting in our diet today, especially with our increased exposure to seed oils. But omega-3 and omega-6 go through parallel pathways of biotransformation in our cells. They have a shared series of enzymes that are desaturases and elongases. So these enzymes add double bonds, they desaturate, and they elongate these chains. So it starts with ALA, alpha-linolenic acid, on the omega-3 side, which is found in animal foods, but also in plant foods, and linoleic acid on the omega-6 side. And they go through a series of parallel enzymes. And I think one of the problems for humans today in terms of omega-3 deficiency is that we are eating too many omega-6s. And that's been talked about before. But the reason for that is that when you eat a lot of omega-6, linoleic acid being the primary one in our diets, all of the enzymes get used up converting the omega-6s. So it takes linoleic acid to gamma-linoleic acid and other intermediates, arachidonic acid. And those are generally used in inflammatory processes in the human body. The body has ways to control it, but if you eat more linoleic acid and you have D5D and D6D, which are turned on and are working a lot, which is delta-6 desaturase and delta-5 desaturase, that combination has been associated with a lot of negative outcomes in humans. And in fact, there have been Mendelian randomization studies looking at D6D, which is delta-6 desaturase, which is part of that omega-6 pathway. And Mendelian randomizations are imperfect, but as far as a Mendelian randomization goes, they can connect causality with D6D for cardiovascular disease, which essentially means that if your delta-6 desaturase is working more and you're eating a lot of linoleic acid, in terms of a Mendelian randomization study, that's pointing a strong finger at that directly causing cardiovascular disease. Now, D6D is only involved in omega-6, but it's one of these it's a shared enzyme for omega-3 and omega-6, but it has to do with the linoleic acid and the fact that these sort of inflammatory downstream intermediates are made by D6D. So you don't really want to be giving your body a lot of linoleic acid to make into things which are probably incorrectly inflammatory in your body through D6D. And when you eat a lot of linoleic acid, your body can't bioconvert the omega-3s, which I think leads to deficiencies in omega-3s. So I don't eat a lot of omega-3s. I don't eat a lot of EPA and DHA, but I get a good amount of ALA from animal fat. I get some EPA and DHA in milk and some in my animal fat, my butter and my tallow, and the fat that comes on my steaks, but I don't eat a lot of egg yolks anymore. I think I'm kind of sensitive to eggs immunologically, and it's hard for me to find good quality eggs, like we talked about earlier. But when you look at my omega-3 levels on a test, I have lots of omega-3s because I'm not gumming up the biosynthesis pathway for omega-3 with a bunch of omega-6s. I have very, very low amounts of omega-6 in my diet because I don't eat egg yolks. I don't eat chicken. I don't eat pork. I don't eat seed oils. Like the omega-6 in my diet is extremely low. It's not zero, and it doesn't need to be zero, but the amount of omega-6 linoleic acid in tallow or ruminant animal fat is 1% to 2%. It's very, very low. So you will make more omega-3 if you don't eat too much omega-6. So I think the problem for a lot of humans today is not only do we not eat enough omega-3 because we're eating too many ultra-processed foods, but we're eating far too much omega-6, and that's preventing the conversion of omega-3 into the downstream metabolites that it needs to become, the DPA, the DHA, and the EPA.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch the full episode. I'll see you over there.
Excess linoleic acid in the human diet leads to excess linoleic acid in human cell membranes. And that creates an oxidative liability for us. It puts extra stress on the body. It's sort of like having extra dry wood around your cabin in the mountains and always running your wood-burning stove.